Welcome to another episode of Healing Through Love. Each week, we share ideas, experiences, and resources to increase the awareness of domestic and family violence and to empower survivors to grow and thrive. We talk with experts who share their advice, or with people who have experienced abuse, no matter where they are on their journey. This is all about healing through love. And now, here are your hosts, Charlene Lynch and Rose Davidson.
The Healing Through Love podcast with Charlene Lynch and Rose Davidson. Forgiveness is an essential mental health practice. In episode 62, Barbara J Hunt shares with us how forgiveness has the potential to transform relationships.
The thing that happens with forgiveness is, I think, once you start talking about your resentment in the process, you're addressing the other person in your imagination, you realize how much stuff is down there. And one of the most common things I get either from one-to-one people or from working with groups of people is, I had no idea there was that much anger down there.
Yes, passive aggression that turns up in so many things, including addiction. Yes, I love it. So listeners, we're diving in deep to have a look at forgiveness and how we can make that a daily practice. I love the idea of writing down a list so that you can dive in deep. Got to get to 36. It's like the magic number. And then how can you shift that and hold that forgiveness frequency and also revisiting it on a daily basis. And
The Healing Through Love podcast with Charlene Lynch and Rose Davidson. The Healing Through Love podcast with host Charlene Lynch and Rose Davidson would love to acknowledge Global Glamping Charities Incorporated for generously supporting this podcast. Global Glamping Charities, solving homelessness in all of its forms. Reach out to them at globalglamping.org.
Hello and welcome to the Healing Through Love podcast. I'm your host, Charlene Lynch from charlenelynch.com. Healing Through Love is here to help victims and survivors of domestic and family violence find their way back to living a more fulfilling and meaningful life. We interview experts and survivors who share their personal stories and offer advice to those who have experienced abuse, no matter where you are on your healing journey. As well as the Healing Through Love podcast, we hold annual Pamper Days here in South Australia for survivors of domestic and family violence, where local businesses come together and pay it forward for a beautiful day of indulgence. Think day spa on steroids. And we're so excited that this concept has now gone global and we're helping communities abroad set up their own Pamper Days. We're very excited about this pay it forward opportunity. So if this resonates with you on any level, or you'd like to be interviewed here on the Healing Through Love podcast, please reach out to us at hello@htlaustralia.org, and everything is in the show notes and the show description. Every week we interview amazing guests, and this week is no different. Today we're interviewing Barbara Hunt. She is a forgiveness specialist. Oh, I can't wait to dive in deep to this. Best-selling author of Forgiveness Made Easy. I love that because it can be complicated. A retreat, a workshop leader, and a transformational coach. And she's also a musician. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks, Charlene, and delighted to be here and having this conversation with you.
It's beautiful, and a special hello from Healing Through Love. How did you get yourself into a position where you're a transition coach for forgiveness? Like, how did you get here?
It's an interesting story. It started a long time ago. I was in a personal spiritual development training room, and they invited us to think about who we needed to forgive, and I wrote my list, and I got to number 36, and I thought, probably resent my mum. I put her name down, and what was really interesting about that was my mum was ill. She had multiple sclerosis. And from the time I was about 15 until the time she died, which was when I was 30, we had a long journey of very challenging circumstances because of her illness. And there was something about admitting that I was resenting something that you would think you shouldn't really be resenting. It's not her fault. But there was something when I heard some other people's stories about forgiveness. They've important, like massive big things that I couldn't relate to. And I had such a lot of shame around my own need to forgive. They were mostly petty things. And the example of my mum. And at that point, I decided to take forgiveness on as a practice. And each time I realized I was resenting somebody, I'd write their name on my list and then I'd do my practice. And I really got interested in personal spiritual development and tools that worked. I was really fascinated by, because originally I did a lot of work with the More to Life organization, and I did trainings with them to teach some of their courses. And then I got really interested in all the other teachers out there, Byron Katie and Brandon Bays and Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra, and just was on a massive big trip to just discover as much as I could about how do we manage being human beings. And forgiveness stayed with me, and I used to coach people one-to-one. I still do occasionally, like I don't have a massive big practice, but I do coach people one-to-one when they get really stuck with their forgiveness. I've worked on retreats, and what happened was in the 7 years that I worked on the detox retreat, we would take people through a juice fast, but also through very deep emotional work. And I got really interested in why do some people who've just had a family member insulted at a wedding find it really hard to forgive, and other people who've been significantly abused as a child or as an adult, sexually, emotionally, physically, how is it that they are able to forgive? So then I got really interested in, we all know forgiveness is such an amazing principle. It's in every religion in the world. It makes sense even if you're not religious or spiritual, but we don't do it. We find it really hard. Culturally, all of our movies are about revenge and not about forgiveness. So I got really interested in two things. One was the massive potential. So imagine if every single person in the world did their forgiveness work, every single one, we would be living in a completely different world. So that's the potential. We could all go into lockdown for 2 weeks, do our forgiveness practice, come out into a completely new world. And so we're not doing that. So the questions are, why not? So they were my two interests. One, the massive potential. Two, why we don't. And then I ended up writing my book called Forgiveness Made Easy, because I was really like, how can I break this down? How can I help people with the places where they seem to get stuck in forgiveness? And there's a few places, and I'd love to share about those.
Yes,
if that's helpful.
yes, please. I'm a
anything?
lover of forgiveness. It's an integral part of my journey and my evolution, and I'm absolutely fascinated about the subject. So please, yes, tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it is fascinating. So the first thing I'll say about forgiveness, which I learned from my original teacher, Kay Bradford Brown at the More to Life organization, was the definition of forgiveness. Because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what forgiveness is and what it isn't. We're afraid it means that we're saying it's okay, or we have to go back into a relationship with that person, or it's taking the weaker position, or it's not holding boundaries, or it's not respecting yourself. And he says forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. Yes. So ill will can be grudges, great grief. So I'll say it again, it's quite long.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And yeah, it describes it perfectly.
Yeah. So forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. And it's like this, we kind of collect up all our, like the little grudges, the gripes, the grievances, the things that the people do wrong. And we're kind of, this is what our hearts look like. Inside we've got, well, that's my mom, and that's my brother, and this is my best friend. And we carry all of this in our hearts. And the absolute refusal looks like this. You can feel it, can't you?
Yes.
The difference between carrying all of that in your heart and not. And that's the thing, because we're the ones who are suffering. There are some really lovely quotes about forgiveness and resentment. Sometimes people talk about unforgiveness, and I tend to not do that because I like to call it what it is, which is resentment. grudges, gripes, grievances. And you've probably heard the saying about holding on to resentment is like taking poison and hoping the other person will die. My favorite, holding on to resentment is like setting yourself on fire and hoping the other person will be bothered by the smoke. I really like that.
We can laugh at this, yes, and many of our listeners are in a position that the thought of forgiveness is challenging. And I understand that. And our listeners know that both myself and Rose are here because we're survivors. But if you can find a way to hold that forgiveness in your heart and let go of the resentment, it will change the speed at which you'll heal. I love it. Can you give us some more tips and techniques as to how we can move through this?
Yeah, some of it is what you're saying, and I do make it. I try to be light with it to normalize the fact that we all carry grievances. We're a lot less lovely than we like to put on our Instagram or our Facebook pages. We all hold resentment, and that's why I outed myself about resenting my mum for being ill, because it's really important to say yes, we resent when we have to take care of other people. Your experience with your son, that there are things that other people do where it looks like, well, why do I need to forgive that? And the forgiveness part is because we hold, and it might not be ill will, it might just be a no, I wish it was different, I wish this was different. But that's actually like having the brake on when you're trying to go forward. Wanting something to be different from the way it is actually pointless in the moment. You can't change it. It is the way it is. It's a question of then, do you move forward without that? Like, you can go to the court and try and, get the most money out of your ex with your resentment, or you can go to court without. What can we do? How can we make this work for both of us? And I think in cases of violence and sexual abuse, it's really hard to let go of your resentment because something has happened to you. There has been a violation. What's important when you do forgiveness work, the way I do it, is there's a process where you get the opportunity to clear up something, particularly with somebody who you may never see or never want to see again. Because I work in like an active imagination process. So you're working in the realm of the imaginal, where you have sovereignty. You can do anything, say anything, resolve anything, heal anything, because it's your imagination. But before, sometimes what I do with people before we do any forgiveness work is look at a few things, especially when I work with fields. So I do open forgiveness practice fields. I call them forgiveness fields for two reasons. One is that beautiful Rumi poem, "Out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." And then the other is from Charles Eisenstein. Isn't that beautiful? And the other one is from Charles Eisenstein. He's an ecologist and a thinker, and a writer. And he wrote the book, "The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible." And he talks about a forgiveness field. So every time someone forgives, you add like a resonance. We add to the field. And so I host these online open fields, and people come to do their practice. And at the beginning, I get them to write their list. Who do they need to forgive? So encourage them to get as far as number 36. You have to really lower your bar, pretty much everyone you've ever met, and write their names down. The neighbors, helicopters, the government. I mean, we resent all kinds of things. People who are more successful than us, they need, just put it all down. And then I get people to write a score, like how intense is it? So some people maybe just like 1 out of 10, other people, this is just something that's really stuck, 10 out of 10. And then I get them to add out how many years have they held their resentment. And if you start adding up all the years you've held your resentment, a single person can have many hundreds of years. And so in a group, we've got thousands of years of resentment in the field. And that is wonderful for us to go, well, we really need to take care of this. This is like toxic, effluent that's in our hearts, and we can do something about it. And we choose one person to work on, or one thing, I'm hosting a global forgiveness field on tomorrow with a friend, which is where we're invited to forgive the global picture, the polycrises and all the things that we're challenged by as humanity. But I'm doing a forgive your kids and a self-forgiveness and a global, another one which will be for the International Day of Peace. But I cycle around, sometimes forgive your father, sometimes just an open field where people can come and do their forgiveness work. But I like to see it as a practice. And because with our forgiveness, sometimes we say, oh, I've forgiven them, but you would never say that about yoga. You would never say, I've done yoga. It's an ongoing practice. You keep people, sometimes you need to forgive the same person more than once because different layers come up. So when I worked on my mum, I forgave her at that time, which was before she died. And then I forgave her again and then since then, I've forgiven her. Like you do layer after layer because other things come up. So I really, my mission, if you like, is to see and teach forgiveness as a practice, a bit like mindfulness. Lots of people are now aware of mindfulness, which they weren't maybe 30 years ago. And my joy would be for people to see forgiveness as it's just something you do, just like you clean your teeth, you go to the hygienist, you do yoga, you go walking, you take care of your body, and it's how you take care of your relationships.
I love it because we do gratitude, and for most of us, gratitude is part of our process on a daily basis. But you're not just thankful for the sun once, like you can be thankful every day, just like you can with forgiveness. You can still revisit that and pile up more forgiveness for that person so that you can let go of more resentment. I love it. Now, when you say field, is it like a Zoom conversation? Is that what you do?
Yes, it's Zoom. And what's wonderful about Zoom is it's perfect for doing that kind of work because everybody is on the screen with their cameras on, but their microphones are off. So when I guide everyone through the process and they're speaking out loud in the process and getting things off their chest that maybe they never had the opportunity to say, including swearing and not being very, politically or spiritually correct, no one can hear because you've got your microphone off, as long as there's no one in the house or they're in a different part of the house. And then I get everyone to indicate by putting their hand on their upper chest, so I know when everyone's ready, and we go through to the next step and then the next step. So it's actually really powerful. People are sort of surprised. And also the thing that happens with forgiveness is, I think once you start talking about your resentment in the process, you're addressing the other person in your imagination, you realize how much stuff is down there. And one of the most common things I get either from one-to-one people or from working with groups of people is, I had no idea there was that much anger down there.
Yes, passive
passive
aggression that turns up in so many things, including addiction. Yes, I love it. So listeners, we're diving in deep to have a look at forgiveness and how we can make that a daily practice. I love the idea of writing down a list so that you can dive in deep. Got to get to 36. It's like the magic number. And then how can you shift? How can you shift that and hold that that forgiveness frequency, and also revisiting it on a daily basis? And there was something that you said that really triggered me as a survivor, and that is things happen to you. And I just remember living in a land where everything happened to me. And it wasn't until I was able to language, and this is while I'm still standing there black and blue looking in the mirror going, this happened for me. And it wasn't until I could say this happened for me and shift that, then I could start to forgive me first for even being in that situation, and then eventually forgive the perpetrator. So yeah, and it is a process. It's not like, and it's done. It is, and you may have to go back and revisit it. So I love this, that we can have our gratitude process, and we can also have our forgiveness process, and we can make it part of our brushing the teeth process. I love it. This is perfect. So now you've got a book. How do we get access to the book?
It's on Amazon. I apologize for that, but it is on Amazon. But it's available all over the world, which is great. And then also I have a link tree, which is linktr.ee/Barbara J Hunt. So it's Barbara J Hunt. You need to have the J in there. And then that also will give you links to the book and to the forgiveness fields. I make sure that the most current ones, so whenever this gets released, the most current ones will be up there. And then also I have like an evergreen mini course, which is me guiding you through that process. So it's a series of 4 videos. There's a couple of introductory videos, and then I guide you through the whole process of my 7-step forgiveness made easy process. And that's like a guided visualization in 7 steps for you to do. You don't have to do it as a daily practice, but that's the form. And once you learn it, it's really wonderful. You can then do a daily practice. I often wake up in the morning thinking, yep, I need to do that before I get up. So I do like a little process, and then I've cleared my field before I get up, which is great.
I love it. This is when we come from a space of forgiveness, we raise our frequency. That's known.
Yeah.
And when we raise our frequency, we raise the frequency of people around us. So, you
Absolutely.
know, it's so true. And so if we want to live on a different planet, we need to start with some high vibe. And the high vibe comes from forgiveness. So I love it. We can change the planet.
Yeah, exactly. And when we do our forgiveness, I say this usually at the end of things to encourage people to practice, is that your forgiveness is an act of amnesty for the whole of humanity. When you do your forgiveness, I mean, this happens so many times. I can't it just seems ridiculous that it happens. You know, that people say to me all the time, they do their forgiveness work and something moves because they've moved the dance. And then the other person, if they're in a relationship that is ongoing, will do something like text them. Or one woman came up to me in the retreat and said, "You'll never guess what? My mum texted me that she loves me. She has never told me that." And we'd just done some forgiveness work on her mum. And it's not, and again, really important to say, especially in cases of abuse, forgiveness is not reconciliation. Forgiveness is about what's going on inside your heart, and you can choose to free your heart of the resentment and the pain and the expectations and the disappointments and the things that did happen and the things that didn't happen, and particularly accessing a younger you. That can be really important part of the process, so that there's healing done at that level, as well as setting a clear intention going forward. From now on, whenever I think of you, I'm going to, or whenever I see you, I'm going to treat you in this way. So there is a sense of clearing the past, but also so that you're free in the future to be different in some way, to have a different kind of relationship.
I love it. And listeners, we have to be honest and admit that sometimes we're the perpetrators. So I've got a question for you, Barbara. If you are the perpetrator, how do you dial into forgiveness when you're seeking forgiveness for somebody else?
That is such a great question. I'm glad you asked. I think of it like a plait. There's forgiveness is a three threaded piece of work. Forgiving others, asking for forgiveness, and forgiving ourselves, and they often all come together, because even if we have been violated, sometimes there's things that we also need to forgive. Like we need to forgive ourselves for putting ourselves in that position, or there may be things that we also did back to that person. We may have been vengeful, we may have done other things, so they're often together. And the other thing as well, when I'm talking about plaits, is forgiveness and grief. It's really important that we acknowledge that often, I think they're like sisters, forgiveness and grief come together. That when we engage with our forgiveness work, we're also engaging in our grief for what we lost, what we didn't have, what was taken from us. And part of the forgiveness process that I teach includes like a restoration. There's an exchange that happens in part of the process, where things that were taken, like your innocence or whatever, gets restored, and that can be incredibly healing as well.
Yeah, I'm going to cry, Barbara, because when I was in a position to forgive my son for his choice of suicide, that allowed me to go through the grieving process at the speed of love. And we were talking before the show that I might have forgiven him on that evening, but it took me a long time to forgive myself. So just because we can forgive one situation It doesn't necessarily mean we turn the tables that we can apply the same. The practice might be the same, but sometimes it's a bit of a bigger boulder to move. Would you agree, Barbara?
Absolutely. And it's particularly with self-forgiveness. And some of when I work with self-forgiveness, sometimes the thing you need to untangle first is the mind. Forgiveness, I think, is always about untangling the heart, unloading the heart. But sometimes you need to work with the mind first, because we tell ourselves things like, in your circumstances, I'm not a good enough mother. I made mistakes. It's my fault. I blah, blah, blah. So you're going to have all of your inner critic, the mind talk, as I call it, is in there. And you need to do something with that, because you don't want to forgive yourself for something that isn't even true. You want to know whether or not it's true or not. So you do that piece of work, as well as then also do the work of the heart, which is the forgiveness part. And also, I love what you're saying as well, because you keep saying at the speed of love. I think that forgiveness is the highest act of love, because it's a kind of letting go in the heart. And so that therefore means it's unconditional.
And
It's
not
unconditional. I'm choosing to let go of this, no matter what you did or what the circumstances were or whatever your excuses were. I am choosing to not hold my ill will. And that is such a powerful stance. I mean, that is why it's a master spiritual practice, and it's in every single religion and spiritual tradition, because it's so hard. And if you think about meditation, that's letting go in the mind. Forgiveness is the letting go in the heart.
yes,
And
so
that's why it's so powerful.
so
And also we don't know how to do it. I mean, bless us, we have no training at all about how to do any of these things. How do you manage your mind? We don't know. That's one of the other things that I teach. How do you forgive? We don't know. How do you let yourself really feel your feelings? How do you connect? How do you be grateful? How do you, we just don't have any training.
No, it's so true. Without a doubt, every time I speak, somebody asks, well, how do you do forgiveness? Even though that's not what I'm on stage to talk about, it's one of the things I do mention. And how do you let go of a hot potato? You just let go. So I don't know how I managed to, and I still hadn't been out. I need to read your book. There's no question about it. I need to read the book. I need to do the practice. I'm going to do the free course. I'm going to follow you around inappropriately. I think it's fantastic that you refer to the fields. And so this is like a neural net that encompasses the entire planet and probably the entire universe. And if we can fill that up like you would a bank account with currency of forgiveness, we can help this planet heal. That's not what you were expecting to hear today. We're talking about forgiveness. Yes, and forgiveness is that big. I know. Yeah. So who do you have to forgive? We have to write a list of 36. Is that how we start the journey?
At least, yeah. Be generous, lower your bar really low. Everyone, if you've had parents, which everyone has, step parents, grandparents, siblings, no siblings, early childhood, friends, the ones who bullied you at school, middle school, first boyfriend, first girlfriend, but first boss. I mean, that's like 20 without even trying. So it's so worth it. I think that's the other thing, just to say, it's so worth it. Whenever people do the process, either in the groups or individually, they say, I feel so much lighter. And also, we know there's been scientific studies about the difference in your physiology. So this is for your physical body as well. This is a master mental health practice. And we all need as much mental health help as we can get now, especially everything is so crazy. And so having a way of doing it, I think that's what's helpful is that there is, because it seems so mysterious. There's even a book out there called Forgiveness is Really Strange, which is great. It's collecting stories, but it's not helpful. That was what my purpose was. Like, I really want to write something that helps people actually do it. And just like two other things just about why we don't. One is we don't realize we're holding the hot potato. We're just so used to it in our hands. We just think that's the way it is.
What potato?
We don't. Yeah, exactly. What potato? So we don't realize the damage that it's doing. And that's also partly because culturally we have such an emphasis on revenge. And imagine, for example, imagine Romeo and Juliet. but with forgiveness. So there's a mediated meeting, and they forgive each other. These are the, Montagues and Capulets. And then there's a wedding. I mean, no one would go to that play. Boring. We love the drama and the trauma, and that is part of the problem, is that we're kind of addicted to the resentment side of things. So one side is we're not aware that we're holding it, or the downsides, but also we're not aware of how delicious it is. I had a friend who read my book and she went, I realized how much I enjoy my resentments. And I was like, that's not the point of the book. But you realize that actually you get something out of it. And sometimes you can bitch with your friends about, this person did that to me, and they, and in fact, like we were saying earlier, there's a payoff for you to hold the resentment, because you can sometimes go, well, it's because of them, as opposed to because I'm holding the resentment. I'm making myself a victim. I'm telling myself that's.
Barbara, have we lost you? Can you still hear me? Oh, there you are. Hi, Barbara.
Yeah.
So
I don't know.
This is from the other side of the world. So Barbara is from the UK, and this is in Adelaide, South Australia. So we've got a little time lag happening. So it's okay. I love this. So we just that last couple of sentences, we missed that. Can you repeat that?
Where did I get up to?
So we were talking about forgiveness and global, and I can't remember exactly what it is that you were saying when it cut out, because you froze and then it cut out.
Okay. I was saying about, we don't know that we're holding the potato. We're not aware of what the downside, like, I've got tension in my neck. I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know. I've got high blood pressure. We have all these physiological things, and we don't think they're anything to do with our resentment. We think they're to do with the other person. And equally on the other side, there are benefits for holding on to our resentment. We get something out of it, secret things, not necessarily things that we're conscious of, but maybe you were saying this earlier, holding on to a resentment can give you justification for either avoiding confronting a situation, or getting yourself out of it, or seeing yourself as a victim. It can also act as protection, and this is really important. If I hold my resentment, it feels like I've got something. And again, my teacher, Kay Bradford Brown, would say, resentment is the power of the powerless. So when you don't have power, particularly when we're young, it feels like, well, I'm shut my heart down and I'm not going to care about that person, as a protective act. Really important. However,
okay. I love it. I've got to ask,
do you
Barbara,
want to live with a protected heart? So now everything that happens to me in life bounces off, because I've got this closed heart.
I love it. So if we had to say where forgiveness lives as a frequency, would we say it's at the same frequency as the heart?
Oh, I definitely. I mean, I do really genuinely believe that forgiveness is like a higher octave, like in music. Like love is, what we adore. Forgiveness is this pure expression of, I am not going to hold any ill will against you, because I choose. I'm in charge. Whatever it is that you do, I like, the great forgiveness teacher, Jesus, at the end of his life, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And when he was asked, how many times do we forgive? 70 times 7. That wasn't even one, like, or, if it's your mum, maybe a few more times. 70 times 7. And there were no exceptions. He didn't go, oh, but apart from, childhood abuse, or apart from murder. No exceptions. So that is really challenging. That is really challenging. And it's such an uncomfortable place for us to be. Our bodies have to find a way of living with an unprotected heart, an undefended heart. That's powerful.
It is powerful. And if you can think about it, where are most of our human issues at the moment? Blood pressure, heart issues, heart attacks, strokes, things that are related to the heart. So could it be that we're living on a planet where forgiveness is a challenge, and this is something that we need to do as a daily practice? I love it. I love everything you talk about, Barbara. I'm a huge fan. You're amazing. So the Linktree link is in the show notes and also in the description. Jump on, have a look at the free course, have a look at the amazing book, because you do need forgiveness to be made easy. Because it is not, yes, hot potato, yes, and there are still steps to follow through. I'm going off to make my list of 36 and then start the process. I love everything that you do. It's such a privilege and a pleasure to be in your proximity. And congratulations for standing up and sharing this message, because this is a message that has to be told. Thank you, Barbara.
Totally. Thank you so much. Great conversation.
Bye for now.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Healing Through Love. You can get further resources, see the show notes, or simply reach out to us via our website at htlaustralia.org. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to your company next time on the Healing Through Love podcast.